Who's that? I guess my producer jamming. Ooh, does somebody have two tabs open? Here we go. All right. Does somebody have two tabs open? Here we go. All right. Hold on. Are we back yet, y'all? All right, guys, I think we are back. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline. I am your host, Shayna Terrell. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As always, Helen from the South Bronx. That's who raised me, but of course, these Philadelphia streets made me, y'all. Educated activists out here fighting for freedom and liberation for her people always. So I want to thank you guys. It's always coming back for another week. Shout out to my co-conspirators who are always out there watching and supporting us week after week. We love you and we appreciate you. So today's show, we will be talking about freedom schools and building the Black Educator Pipeline. And today is a call to action. What are you doing this Freedom Summer? What are you doing to elevate the community this summer? I know what I'm doing. And I'm doing it because Freedom Summer is here. So today we will be talking about the Freedom School Way and how to build the next generations of leaders and activists. So please comment, like, and share. But right now you can comment right in the chat by telling us, what are you doing this Freedom Summer? What are you doing to answer this call to action? So today I would like to welcome two awesome guests to the show. So y'all already know our resident guest, Baba Dr. Carr. Dr. Carr is an expert in legacy of Black education and the co-founder of Philadelphia Freedom Schools Movement. Dr. Carr currently serves as the Associate Professor of Afro-American Studies and Adjunct Professor at Howard Law and the Department Chair of African Studies at Howard University. Dr. Carr led the creation of African American history curriculum now required by all Philadelphia youth within the public school system. He also serves as the City of Philadelphia's first resident scholar of race and culture in 1999. Dr. Carr has dedicated his career to Black history and education through scholarly work, lecturing around the world, and media features which include BBC, NPR, and CNN. He is also the co-host of his own YouTube series, In Class with Carr. So make sure y'all are checking that out. My second guest, wow, I don't know what to say. This brother is my brother from another mother and father, okay? He was born and raised in Northwest Philadelphia. Councilman Isaiah Thomas is the third youngest of 9 children of a Philadelphia school teacher and child care provider. Through Sankofa Freedom Academy, Lincoln University, and Thomas and Woods Foundation, Thomas has put the success of young people at the forefront of his work. Whether in the classroom, on the basketball court, or in City Hall, he believes that education opportunities and coalition building is the way to make Philadelphia the way to make Philadelphia work for all of us. Councilman Thomas has a nonprofit, government, and private sector experience, which allows him to hear multiple sides of an issue and receive input from a variety of stakeholders. He has helped young people get the best education possible, provided out-of-school time programming, strengthen communities of color, and work to improve civic education across the city. Councilman Thomas, in his freshman year of council, was named chair of the Streets Committee and vice chair of Children and Youth Committee. He also sits on appropriations, disabled persons with special needs, education, creative economy, legislative oversight, parks and recreation, public health, public safety, and technology committees. These committee roles and legislation he has passed highlight Councilman Thomas' vision to make Philadelphia work better for every family. Whether addressing gun violence, providing pandemic relief, or making the city government more transparent, Thomas believes in government that works for people and improves the basic quality of life for all. A proud graduate of Philadelphia Public Schools, Councilman Thomas has a Bachelor of Arts from Penn State and a Master's of Education from Lincoln University, the oldest degree granted historically Black college in the nation. He still actively coaches basketball at Sankofa Freedom Academy and is the president of the Coaches Association. Thomas lives in Oak Lane with his wife, Clissa, and two sons, Isaiah Jr. and Isaac. So please welcome to the show, Baba Dr. Carr and Councilman Isaiah Thomas. Welcome, y'all.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here in your presence.
Yes, we are excited that you are here. Shout out to you. And all the great work that you are doing. Okay, that bio kind of like took my breath away. So, like literally,
I was wondering.
So shout out to you.
I don't know. They need a prize. I thought it was you, Shayna. Honestly, I thought it was you.
Listen, bro. I didn't even know you did all that. So I didn't write that. How you spending your time on all of those committees? I had no clue. And then being an excellent father and a role model and example as a great coach. So shout out to you, brother.
Thank you.
Shout out to you.
It. And I'll tell you one thing that's not in that bio that I'm extremely excited about. I was recently placed on the board for the African American Museum. So I'm excited to. I haven't announced it yet. We will eventually. We're just in budget and stuff like that. But I'm excited to begin to work on their board and to work with the African American Museum to just do the great work that we already do. So whatever suggestions or recommendations, y'all let me know, and I'm going to do the work y'all tell me to do. So it's another hat to wear, and hopefully another ally for the work that we all love to do so much.
Man, brother,
yes,
that's music.
So shout out.
That's
and the grand announcement was right here on the show. Yes.
Hey,
congratulations, brother.
Councilman, hey, for all of y'all around the world who are watching this, who tune in and watch Shayna, let's be very clear about this. The museum in Philadelphia and the museum in Wilberforce, these are two of the oldest. They both opened in 1976. So when you think about the museum, the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, Councilman Thomas has just been appointed to serve as custodian for one of the anchor. That is the parent, along with the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit, the DuSable Museum in Chicago, but the African American History and Culture Museums of Philadelphia and Wilberforce, Ohio, those are the two pillars on which the Smithsonian is built. They both came into existence in 1976. Brother, that makes my eyes a little wider to think about. My man Charles Blockson had a hand in getting that together. So, man, come on. Now you talking about Charles Bowser. You talking about, oh my God, you talking about the heroes of Philadelphia got that museum open, brother. Your name on that? I'm feeling pretty good today, Shayna. We can just talk about it. Sam Evans. We talking about, look, I don't even want to start. Man,
listen, we got many reasons to feel good. And like I said, shout out to you, Councilman Thomas. Many reasons to feel good. But one of the reasons I brought y'all here today is because we all know, y'all, it is Freedom Summer. Freedom Summer. This is where we get to work at. So I would love, Dr. Carr, if you could start us off with a little bit of history about Freedom Summer and its significance and why it's so important in our community.
I'm going to say a quick word because, as we know, our brother Councilman Thomas, one of the ways he can do all these things is that he can do these things on parallel tracks. So he and his staff are advocating for us as we speak. So if you need me to, if you need to jump out, Councilman, if you want to jump in to move things around, please let us know, because I'm not going to talk long about this. As you said, Shayna, when I started working in Philadelphia for the school district of Philadelphia in 1998, the following year, we went into a partnership with the Children's Defense Fund out of DC to become a site for the Children's Defense Fund's Freedom Schools, which was a revival of the Freedom Schools project of 1964 in Mississippi. This was connected with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we could talk more about that, later. But make a long story short, that first year we opened 7 Freedom School sites in partnership with the School District of Philadelphia and the Children's Defense Fund. And our brother was one of the pioneer Freedom School students. At that time, coming out of Frankfort High School with his crew, joining up with all those other young people. Kevin White out of Ben Franklin High School, Nadira Suleiman, I think she was at Germantown. I mean, so all these young people who are now full freedom fighters in all the spaces with families and children of their own. I can't believe that, man. Became the pioneers. No other city in the country had more than one freedom school with the Children's Defense Fund. Philadelphia started with 7, went to 14, went to 21, and every year we got bigger and bigger, and it was all anchored in this question of intellectual work. The concept of freedom schools is based in this idea that classrooms are sites for raising consciousness as well as creating enhancing capacity to read and write, to do math, to think about content and all these things. And so the long history of Freedom Summer is really anchored in the idea of Black self-determination and Black education. That's what they were doing in 1964 in Mississippi with Storley Carmichael, Kwame Ture, and others. That's what Lincoln University, Cheney University, the 2 oldest HBCUs in the country, were doing. And that's what we do in Philadelphia Freedom Schools. And we can talk more about that later. But it's in the long arc of Black self-determination and putting education at the center, which is another reason I'm so glad to have our brother here who is fighting to make that real, not just in summer, but year round for our young people in the city of Philadelphia.
And Zeke, you're literally in the mix right now doing political work, like as we are speaking, you working. If you could just give us the significance of Freedom Summer and the political impact that has on Black people.
So when I think about this Freedom Summer, if you're talking about the Freedom Summer of 1964, I mean, you're looking at one of the most influential eras of any lifetime. And I think that's important to say because for us who consider ourselves historians who've studied this work, it's kind of one of those things that goes without saying. But as I begin to re-engage and talk to young people, there's a whole nother wave of young people that we have to make sure that we're educating in a way where they're receiving accurate and authentic historical context. And so when I think about the summer of 1964, and when I think about that Freedom Summer and the initiatives that took place to be able to get people registered to vote, there's a direct correlation between that work that was done there, the work we're doing now, and the political work that I do every day on a consistent basis. We recognize at that time that the vote had a significant impact on the quality of life issues that Black and brown people were dealing with, the problems that they were dealing with on a consistent basis, whether you're talking about racial, whether you're talking about economic, or whether you're talking about another form of social justice. And if you look at where we are today compared to where we were in 1964, we still see similar problems as it relates to voter apathy. People not necessarily believing in government, people feeling like nothing will change based on the conditions that they're facing. And so for us in the work that I try to do, specifically leaning more on the political side, it's imperative that when we do get these victories, we recognize them and we show them to people on a consistent basis. I know this isn't necessarily a political dialogue, but when you talk about the organizing and the voting efforts that took place in 2020, that's historic, right? In 2044 and 2060, people are going to talk about the year 2020 and the organizing effort that took place. Just like in 2021, we refer back to 1964. And when you look at 2020, not just the voting and the voting effort that took place, we also have to look at the financial ramifications that have come out of those electoral outcomes. So let me give you an example. Right now, in the city of Philadelphia, we're looking to invest over $150 million in initiatives to be able to address gun violence in the city of Philadelphia, as well as prevention-based initiatives. We're going to vote on that budget in about 5 minutes. So if I go off screen, that's what that's about.
Yes, sir.
But we would not have the means and mechanisms to be able to provide those type of resources if we did not have the win that we had in 2020 from the federal government. That's because right. The truth is, we in most big cities across the country we're facing deficits. We've seen cuts that were unprecedented. We can't collect tax revenue, right? So for the young people who don't understand why cities are broke, cities are like businesses, right? So just like businesses couldn't thrive, just like people were suffering, just like businesses needed a big bailout, cities need a big bailout too. And the former administration did not have the appetite to provide bailout dollars to cities, but they were more than happy to provide more bailout dollars to big businesses than what they actually needed. And so now that we have an opportunity to be bailed out, similar to what those businesses were bailed out last year, it puts us in a position where we have flexibility on the dollars that we have right now, as well as the revenue that's coming in. And it could, and as Black legislators who care about Black people, who are unapologetic about saying it, right? So as soon as I get off with y'all, I'm gonna say the same Black language right here in City Council.
Yes, sir.
It puts us in a position where we can advocate and fight for resources in a way that we've never seen before. So, we're living in a time right now where we're seeing tangible examples of how organizing efforts in the 1960s, specifically the summer of '64, were parallel to some of the organizing efforts that we've seen in the year 2020, and we're watching Black folks reap the benefits. Now, let me just, a lot of people, from a philosophical perspective, will say that we got it wrong in the 1960s, right? Like they'll say that we probably should have stuck with more of a segregated mindset, because let's talk about education for a second, right? A Black child in the 1960s was probably more likely to see a Black educator in their face and teaching them, from the perspective of somebody who looks like them and come from where they come from, compared to what you'll see right now, right? Like a young person growing up in the school district of Philadelphia, you're not very likely to see many Black educators throughout the course of your academic experience.
Correct.
So the thing that has to happen with this moment is, in the midst of making decisions on how we spend this money and how we allocate our resources, we have to get it right. We can't look back on 2020 and say, oh, instead of investing in gun violence prevention, we should have invested in infrastructure, right? Or instead of investing in the infrastructure in our schools, we should have invested in the future of employment and employment opportunities. We have to get this moment right. And in order for us to assure that we get this moment right, and I'm gonna stop right here, the level of advocacy that must take place from poor people and people of color has to be like we've never seen before, right? The amount of money that we're getting is like we've never seen before. And I can tell you right now, people who are in charge of spending this money will spend the money based on the advocacy from the constituents that they're responsible for serving. So if I wake up every day and I'm getting tons of emails from people saying fund freedom schools, put money into education, put money in the Black neighborhoods, it's going to be much more difficult for me to say no to that than if I don't hear from that demographic at all. So when we're talking about social action and advocacy and what needs to happen, I mean, the advocacy that happens right now will make a huge difference, probably more of an impact than what we've seen in our lifetime on Black communities, or we can get it wrong. And those dollars can be spent on providing tax breaks for businesses and investments in neighborhoods that's already gentrified. We have a choice, and it's going to be up to the people, as far as Philadelphia, that will determine how those resources get allocated. So I'll stop right there. I know that was a lot, but I really want people to understand that what went on in the summer of '64, Dr. Carr used to tell us all the time when we were high school students, history repeats itself. And we're literally living in a moment right now where history is repeating itself from the summer of 1964 to what we've seen last year in 2020. And now the outcomes, right? So when you talk about Voting Rights Act, when you talk about other legislation that came after the advocacy of summer 1964, I'm not one of those who feel like we got it wrong. I'm one of those who actually feel like we got it right. But I want to get it right again. And we're in that phase right now where the next 2 to 5 years can really dictate, determine, and shape how Black communities live in this country moving forward.
Absolutely.
Dope.
Absolutely.
Dope. So then what that brings me to, right, Dr. Carr, hearing what Isaiah said, how do we organize the people on the ground? How do we get constituents in different places, in different spaces, to come together to advocate for what's needed and for what's right? With disenfranchisement out there, with people not understanding how city government works, with people not knowing how to get organized, what are some of the lessons we can take from Freedom Summer 1964 to get folks together and get them educated and get them organized?
Well, I think we just heard the answer. Political work, and I appreciate what our brother has just said, what Isaiah just said. He said, well, this isn't necessarily a political conversation, but of course it always is.
It always is.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Our lives are political. And the answer to that question, Sister Shana, in many ways is contained in the question. The first thing it requires is literally being in community, not on social media. This is great platform for raising consciousness, awareness, directing people to resources. But at the end of the day, this is a people conversation. Organizing requires being with people. There are two powers. Jonathan Shell wrote a book many years ago called The Unconquerable World. And he says, one power in the world is nuclear weapons. Another power in the world is the people of the world. And we just heard our councilman say, the reason that politicians take action based on power. Yes. And whether they be a principled person who is deeply grounded, comes out of a community and a family of deep political commitments to community, has been through every stage of organizing, and then finds his way into city council with our votes. People say voting doesn't matter. All you got to do is look at Isaiah Thomas to see that that's not true, and can advocate for us. But when we make it easier for him by surrounding him with those calls, with those bodies in the street. Alternatively, someone who is our open enemy. Yes. And who is beholden to special interests and lobbyists and all kind of capital, and who has their own selfish interests, will find it that much more difficult to move against the people if enough of the people are organized. And so when we see the Freedom Schools of 1964, as Isaiah just said, they sit not as an independent entity. They are sitting as one of the tools for organizing a whole state to resist oppression. And they were pursuing the ballot. Did we get it right? Yes. Did we get it wrong? No, because at the center of that practice was the central tenet of organizing. And we know this from Freedom Schools. We read Charlie Cobb and Bob Moses' book, Radical Equations. Bob Moses came to visit us. Dave Dennis came and sat with us from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Sonia Sanchez. Over the years, they've all been in community with us. John Churchville there in Philadelphia. And the central tenet, Charlie Cobb and Bob Moses always remind us, is when you come into a community, you ask those people, what do you want? What do you need? And how can I be of service? As Ella Jo Baker, we got Ella Baker trainers in Freedom Schools. As Ella Baker says to us, the job of an organizer is to put themselves out of a job. In other words, I'm coming into this community to serve. So in the Freedom Schools in Philadelphia, 1964, one of the things that they asked the people is, what do you need to know? What do you need to learn? Some of the young sisters were like, look, if we knew how to type, we could get jobs as receptionists. We could get jobs that are better paying. So one of the things they taught was typing in the Freedom Schools. They also teaching, let's interpret the Constitution. Why? Because they say you need to interpret it to register to vote. Okay, let's talk about power. Let's take the way you talk, write it on one side of the board, take the way they teach you as standard English on the other side of the board, and begin to translate. Why? Not so that you think you're not right because of how you speak, but to show you that the way you speak is absolutely legitimate, and the way that this other way is just another way to say what you're saying. In other words, Freedom Schools were at the center of empowerment. The only thing I would mention is another sister who Freedom Schools drew from, the Citizenship Education Program with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was the great Septima Clark out of South Carolina. One of our models, as we've talked about so many times. Y'all talk about the center all the time. Septima Clark understood that political power is often built not only on organizing, but once you have people together, by helping them understand how moving collectively will improve their lives. And education gives us the tools to understand those connections that Isaiah was talking about. And it's just hard work. It's unglamorous work. It can be tedious. It can be exhausting. But once you've done it, you get to the point, and then we've got somebody like Isaiah Thomas who's in the room, and then it clicks. Oh, this is one of the reasons we did it. Yeah. And it didn't just start at the election. It started 5 years ago. It started 10 years ago. It started 20 years ago. We've got to understand that this is incremental work. And the only way we win is to stay at it. Organizing is about staying at it.
And I think that both of y'all pointed out some extremely key points. And for me, it's like, how can Freedom School serve as an example to organize and educate not only Black children, but Black people? Because I think Freedom Schools is one of the most important things to come out of 1964. I know we talk about all the bills, all the political action, but like once that's done, right, like that's done. What continues to repeat itself, what continues to grow, what can continue to expand is a school, a Freedom School, a place to train children, a place to raise young activists, like that opportunity that is there, that will exist forever. So the concept of the design of a Freedom School to me was so genius, right? Because once you have little people, right? Like we have Isaiah as a high school student from Frankfurt. I mean, came from a great household, but maybe didn't know much about activism and organizing or being of servant leadership, right? And of service. You get into a space like freedom schools and they teach you to be of service, which I think is extremely important. I know was important for me. We get into these other spaces where folks are educating us and they're not educating me to be of service. So, like you said, the job of an organizer is to put me out of business. Job in freedom schools is to educate young people so you can go out and be activists, so you can go out and take your power. And I think that's extremely important to point out about the Freedom Summer of 1964 and why freedom schools are extremely important. Councilman, you want to speak to that?
I agree 100%. You know, and you know, in the midst of freedom schools, one of the things freedom schools always done is have a love for reading and taught a love for reading. And for me, you know, my story comes directly from my involvement in high school. I would never have been involved in politics had it not been for freedom schools, right? So I don't come from a family with a traditional political background. I was introduced to my first political job because of the work that I was doing in freedom schools, and that kind of started my journey, you know. So without freedom schools, I would not be doing any of this political work that I'm doing. My love for reading, right, that freedom schools really pushed that. This idea of the reward for good work is more work. The first time that really resonated with me was on a conversation with Dr. Carr on Alex Haley Farm when I was asking him if he thought I should be an Ella Baker trainer or not. And that was his response, and I go on to be an Ella Baker trainer. So, yes, you know, I can think of a lot of poignant conversations, pieces of information and influential things that have happened and put me in the position I'm in. The last thing I'll say, as it relates to this side of stuff and this level of advocacy, you know, when we think about freedom schools and we think about the work that has been done and that will continue to do, in my mind and in my lifetime, I don't know a more influential program. And for us, when you're talking about freedom schools and making an initiative like this free, the coalition is also on the political side because the advocacy needs to be there for the dollars. And so during my first year and a half in council, I've screamed at the top of my lungs, the city needs to fund freedom schools. And I think for the first time, I'm actually starting to resonate with some folks. And it's not about me, right? Like, this isn't like about getting me a check or improving my personal finances. This is about the work that needs to be done. And when you look at the gun violence and a lot of the problems that we see in the city of Philadelphia, if we had a freedom schools in every zip code, I'm 100% sure our city wouldn't be this bad. The problem is that I'm the only one that believes that. And, you know, you need 12 votes to be able to move things on council. And I've been working my butt off to be able to do that. But we still have a lot more work to do. So the advocacy is imperative. It's the difference between us being able to have this conversation or us not being able to have the conversation. And I think that when you look at the work that's been done in the past, we have a lot of victories, and I'm very optimistic about where we're headed towards the future.
Yes, and you make an excellent point just about you're the only one. And I think that sometimes freedom school is just an experience that you have to see it to believe it. And I just, sometimes that bothers me, right? Because it isn't a space for everybody. Everybody's not invited into freedom school space, right? So, and you talking about people of other persuasions that's not their space. It's our space.
But they're impacted. But they're impacted. I should say something. Isaiah makes me think about this. As you know, every year, now we're in our 21st year in Philadelphia. Philadelphia Freedom Schools has a social action project. And at its peak, with 21 sites in every corner of the city, Philadelphia Freedom Schools, in school district buildings, a school is the heart of a community. And so when we hear a councilman speak, it reminds me that gun violence was a social action thing we had at one point. We even, one year we had our issue was no baseball stadium in Chinatown. It was really about dispossession. Remember that? Right? No question. And one of your colleagues, I'm thinking about Helen Gim, long before she was on the city council, she was involved in the parents group, which was connected. And we had a freedom school at Bach. And that freedom school had Black students, like Latinx students, and Asian students, because Asian Americans United was our partnership. And what I'm saying is that, you know, what Isaiah said is so powerful. What our council said is so powerful. I think part of the challenge we have is that we don't have the institutional memory. So when council members from South Philly or North Philly or West Philly, council members, understand that freedom schools resonates in your community, walk the streets, ask the people, ask your voters, how many of them know about freedom schools? And what you're going to unearth is stories that we haven't necessarily collected yet.
Yes.
The case to be made for freedom schools is in those communities. Our social action work is clear. In schools that aren't there anymore, like Charles Drew and University City High School, go all the way out to Northeast, whether it be Frankfurt, whether you start talking about whether it was Ben Franklin in North Philly, whether it be William Penn, it's not there anymore. Go to South Philly with Bach, go to Dobbins over there. Every place, and they were in elementary schools. Understand that. Demmer Bieber Middle School. I mean, if you're invested in your children, you understand our social action work was about making sure that our communities were safe for those children. And so, yeah, it's all political. And the story of freedom schools in Philadelphia is sitting there in the communities waiting for those folk to say, wait, freedom schools? Oh yeah, I remember. In fact, that's how I decided I'm going to college. That's how I decided I was going to go and get my certificate. That's how I decided because thinking work. I'll end with this. Thinking work shapes who we are and what we do with the skills we acquire. So freedom schools isn't just about, let's learn some skills. No, freedom schools, as we just heard our councilman say, is about changing the way we think. And then once we change the way we think, we take our gifts and contribute them to the community. But it starts with how we think. That's what we have to change.
How we think and taking action. And you hit it right on.
Can I add something to that?
Of course.
I'll give you an example. So we've been in a lot of dialogue about Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? The Burning was the book that I was introduced to that taught me about Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. So, it's a 100-year anniversary. And a lot of the political dialogue, people are like, oh, well, I don't know. It just turned into a thing where people was like, well, I either never heard of it or where is the first time you heard it? So when Dr. Carr talked about this idea of how we teach and what we teach and teaching in a way that's empowering folks, I think that's a great example because a lot of people, it started to turn into this trending thing like, where did you hear it or how did you learn about it? And for me, I'm like, wait, time out. How come people don't know about it? And then I had to kind of go back like, oh my goodness, this is another example of something that's been entrenched in my mind because of the work of freedom schools that I think is the norm as it relates to history. And then you look up and you're in this political dialogue with a lot of intelligent folks who've never been exposed to the information. So it goes back to how we teach and what we teach, because when you're talking about people having some level of sympathy for the Black white, part of the problem is they don't know everything we've been through. So when you're talking about Tulsa, for example, a lot of people say, oh, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Why can't Black people do more for themselves? Well, shoot, that's a great example what we did do for ourselves. And, folks burned down what we were trying to do. And if you don't know that, right, you don't have that contextual history, well, how can you really have an accurate perception on who Black people are in America and what it is that we've been through? So the history and what we teach is important, not just to us, but to all people who walk this soil, so they understand what it means to be a Black person in America. So when we scream about these issues, y'all don't know how often I'm the angry Black man. I don't want to be that way, but when you think about our plight, how can I not be? And I just come to accept it. Like, how can I not be? Either I'm angry or I'm complacent, and that's fine because I don't want to be complacent in the midst of the struggle and the things that we're going through. So I just thought that just listening to Dr. Carter, I just wanted to kind of bring that out there because I'll bet other people in the professional spaces are going through the same thing. Like, well, how did you not know about that? Well, the only reason I know is because of freedom schools. Had I not done freedom schools, I have the same, level of education as it relates to the Black experiences here in America.
But that's why that experience and you putting that out, even about Tulsa, is so important. But that brings us back to the connection of this is all political. Because at the heart of freedom schools, educating children and adults is political education. Now, whether you're talking about from Freedom Summer 1964 or you're talking about the Black Panther Party, either one, it's all about political education. It's all about making people know what circumstances they're under, what circumstances they get, and how we get there to liberation and freedom, because that's what this is all attached to. So if people are not understanding that we're not roaming through the world just to roam through it, and as we talk about in earlier context of like this indoctrination of being American. No, our job right here, right now, as Black people is to fight for freedom and liberation. And all of that is connected to a political education. Would you not agree, Doc?
Yeah, no, it's all no, absolutely. And it's so funny thinking about this. And again, listening to Isaiah, listening to you, a couple of years ago before this COVID hit, Brother Isaiah pulled together some of his generation of elected representatives, not only in Pennsylvania, but other places at the Congressional Black Caucus meeting, the annual fall Congressional Black Caucus meeting. And I was so moved, impressed, inspired, and instructed by listening to you all in dialogue, because it also reveals that two things. Number one, we have to empower the people who will represent us in this fight for resources that we hear our councilman talking about. Mm-hmm. And the second thing, in other words, we have to register, we have to vote, we have to select out from among us the best of us to represent us in that space. That's why Isaiah is there. And the second thing, it really, really, really kind of not opened my eyes to as much as it reminded me and helped me understand and see that this next generation is prepared, is the depth of considered, well-reasoned, thoughtful dialogue that was coming from these young people who had clearly not only studied the issues, but knew why it was important and knew the historical context of the struggle that they're engaged in. So when I see Isaiah Thomas, I see Dave Richardson. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I see Roxanne Jones. I see those earlier generations, you know what I'm saying, in this space. But not only do I see that because I'm a student, I see it because of what comes out of his mouth. Let me know he was a student. And he's announced and that cannot be understated. There are a lot of well-meaning people in political office who haven't studied the trajectory. So when they get into a space where somebody gonna flip the script on them, they may not know what to do because they don't know the last 15 times this happened. We have to be very careful about who we support. And when we got somebody we can support, we got to go to the wall. Because this is literally life or death. Isaiah is right. This next 2 to 5 years is not only going to spell the direction of the city of Philadelphia and many cities around this country, it's going to spell whether it's going to be a United States or not. Because our open enemies have decided to drop all pretenses. They go into war in a way they haven't gone to war like this since the Civil War, since the 1860s, not the 1960s. And if we're not careful, this whole thing's going to fracture.
Yes. So with that, what do we think are some major issues that Black people should be organizing around this Freedom Summer in 2021? So what should be our focus Freedom Summer 2021? We know like in 1964, it was tons of stuff, but that voter registration was something that they harped on, and literacy was another thing they harped on for children and for adults. But right now in 2021 Freedom Summer, what should be the focus for Black folks?
Go ahead, Councilman. You working, man. You might be voting right now.
Yeah. I would say a couple things. The first thing is, I honestly think funding for schools. I think that's major. I think that capital investment as far as infrastructure, technology, upgrading our spaces and facilities. We probably won't have on a state level the amount of money that we have anytime soon. I think that is a huge one because you're talking about something that's going to impact generations. You do have some issues that are taking place around voter rights. I think that's extremely important as well too. But look, for us in Pennsylvania, the gubernatorial race next year is major. And if you look at some of the things that state legislators are passing, right? If we do not have the right folks in place to be able to offer what we need as far as vetoes, some of these things will get passed into a law. I'll give an example. There was a law that was passed in Pennsylvania, I believe out the House, either the House or the Senate, I'm not sure which one, that basically would charge women for if you have a miscarriage. Like you have to register your miscarriage, which is like traumatizing people all over again. So that's an example.
And you saying they was trying to pass that? I don't even understand the sense in that. And again, why is your business? But you're right. If we don't have the right people in place to advocate and be the voice for the voiceless, that's how these kind of things get out of hand and the power into a set group of people. But
it's a bad bill. And at the end of the day, people know that the governor is going to veto it, but they're giving you a glimpse of what Harrisburg would look like and feel like and what Pennsylvania would look like and feel like if we do not have a Democrat, because the Republicans control the House and the Senate in Harrisburg right now. So without a Democrat, especially during the Trump administration, we could have seen all type of bad things happen to us. So again, infrastructure for schools, I think that's major. I think that's extremely important. Always, the voter rights issues and voter access and organizing people around voting. But then also, again, that gubernatorial race next year, remember, Freedom Schools was destroyed because of Corbett.
That's right.
That's what destroyed Philadelphia Freedom Schools is Corbett. We don't want to go back to that.
That's right.
When you say that, or you probably still, I was gonna say, explain to people when you say that is what it destroyed it. Because Dr. Carr just got finished saying how we were up to 21 sites, 21 sites, and got down to 0. And then the center, we tried to come back and revive it along with the partnership of Sankofa Freedom Academy to keep that going. But how was funding just completely destroyed where people thought it was okay to take away out of school time and summer programming for children?
I think Dr. Carr probably better to answer that because he was there the whole journey and he knows like exactly how that stuff went with Governor Corbett.
No, it's what you said, brother. It's politics. It was a city council unwilling to invest those dollars. It was a state hostile take over the schools, budget cuts. You know, with all due respect to Easy Ed Rendell, the governor of Pennsylvania, at the time. I remember when John Street was the mayor and David Hornbeck was superintendent of schools. And you saw budget cuts, and a lot of those cuts weren't just, you know, at the behest of a Democratic governor. You've got those, we call them conservatives, but they're not really conservatives. In many ways, they're white nationalists. Whether it be Western Pennsylvania, whether it be the middle of the state, they don't have any investment in human capital. They don't even have the investment in their own voters. They're moving against their own voters, but it's about political power, it's about lobbyists, and so those budgets get cut. And the superintendent of schools at the time, David Hornbeck, resigned rather than execute those budget cuts, and Freedom Schools got caught in the crossfire. But what's important to remember is that because of that state takeover, which led to the School Reform Commission, of course, we had school reform commissioners because, again, they get picked by the governor. You know, the mayor gets to suggest. We had champions on the School Reform Commission. Johnny Itazari, who worked for the school district for many years, Sandra Dungy Glenn, and they were able to continue to filter trickles to Freedom Schools. And then, of course, with the charter school movement, what emerges out of that long struggle, because, again, this isn't just about one size fits all. Political struggle means whatever tools you have available to you, you use them. A lot of people are anti-charter school. I'm not anti-charter school. I'm like W.B. Du Bois. Du Bois said, what the Negro wants is not segregated education. What the Negro wants is not integrated education. What the Negro wants is good education. So we were able to get one of those charters for Sankofa Freedom Academy. That same Sankofa Freedom Academy where Coach Thomas coaches state championship level basketball was the home of Freedom Schools. It was the first in the country's first K-12 freedom school, public freedom school, Sankofa Freedom Academy. We continue our struggle. So I guess I'll end with this. Those things we should be organized around this summer. You know, at the local level, it's all about infrastructure. It's all about funding from the schools. This current federal administration, there's a crack, there's a window there. They're going to do it through budget reconciliation because you got two white nationalists, one from West Virginia and one from Arizona, who are going to use the excuse of not blowing up the filibuster to give this country over to the white nationalist party, which has decided they're going to have minority white nationalist rule for as long as they can till the wheels fall off. But there's a crack through budget reconciliation to perhaps get some infrastructure money. And you know who knows what to do with it? Philadelphia City Council, Isaiah Thomas, got something to say with it. That's something we got to organize around. At the federal level, it's absolutely about this voting rights fight because they're going to try now to take the vote, and they're doing it at the state legislature level. Almost all the states are considering or passing voter suppression laws. And this For the People Act that died in the Senate the other day doesn't even have a line in it to address what they've already done with this legislation at the state level, which is take power away from secretaries of state, take power away from local election officials to supervise election. They're setting it up so they can steal an election in broad daylight. And Pennsylvania is no different. Remember, Pennsylvania is the state where they went to court and basically said the Pennsylvania Supreme Court does not have the right to rule on state issues. And Samuel Alito, a white nationalist on the Supreme Court right now, was hot to get that before the Supreme Court, but he didn't have the votes. If you don't put a friendly administration in Washington, D.C., they're going to finish stacking that court. And if you think it's bad now, Isaiah is right. This next 2 to 5 years might be for the whole ball of wax. Don't think what happens in DC doesn't affect what happens in Philly because it runs through Harrisburg. Please understand the role of state government. So for this Freedom Summer, we got to organize around local issues like infrastructure, like funding schools. And on the federal level, it's all about voting rights because voting rights is what's going to make everything else possible. Once you register to vote, that means police brutality. That means defund, restructure of public safety. It means all the clean drinking water, everything from clean drinking water to child care credits. In fact, I don't care if you want to say something about that. I was talking to Cedric Richmond last week when I was down for the Juneteenth signing. He said, do people understand that once this child tax credit thing kicks in, if you got a young person 6 years old in your house or 6 to 17 years old, you're about to get $300 a piece for them. If you got 3 children between 6 and 15, you get a check every month to help take care of that young person. But not under an administration that says you don't need no money. In fact, I'm giving it to my billionaire friends. This has real world implications.
Serious impact.
One more thing, Sheena, to add to this, that Dr. Carr, again, when I listen to him, he inspires. We also have gerrymandering coming
That's
up
right.
as well. Like, so when people talk about the issue with gerrymandering is when people draw maps, district maps, and they create maps so that it disproportionately represents folks who they feel like can help them move their agenda forward. This is 2020, we did the census. So the reason we do the census every 10 years is because after we do the census, the politicals like me, we then draw our maps for the next decade. So another issue that is going to come after this summer on a federal, state, and local level, people are going to be drawing their maps to determine what and who they represent. So listening to Dr. Carr talk about how elections get stolen and how, we got that one to have to worry about too. So when you talk about the advocacy, it's so much stuff and we're always fighting. And that's because there's so many different ways and institutions and means to oppress us that every day we wake up, we feel like we're swinging at something.
That's right.
Fighting, always fighting, shooting something off. Always.
That's why we have Cheers and Chance.
Bam, white supremacy. Bam, white nationalists. Bam, laws against black people. Like every time, just shielding something to fight, but the fight is on, right?
That's why we have Cheers and Chance, so we can sing while we fight.
Right. The voice, the soundtrack of freedom, right?
That's right.
I trained in the day. I was doing Cheers and Cheers. Ain't no school like freedom schools.
That's
all right. Because we gotta have a soundtrack to our freedom story.
Hey, let me tell you. It's so funny. I know we were running out of time, but Chuck Neblett out of Illinois, who's one of the original Stick singers. I saw him just before COVID. We were in Selma, right at the anniversary of the bridge crossing, and we've all seen him. I mean, Isaiah knows he was the Elebecker trainer. See, some of the Snick singers would come to Tennessee every year, and so I love Chuck Neblett. He's my favorite dude in the Snick singers. Right? So I'm standing next to him. I say, man, that story on Governor Wallace, how y'all made up that song? He said, man, look. We was marching from Selma to Montgomery. We got to Montgomery, and I'm on the steps of the Capitol. I looked out and I seen all them people, and I said, Wallace can't put us all in jail. It's too many people in jail. So just like freedom schools, young people, the soundtrack, Shayna, is so important. We take whatever is going on in the music and put our own music to it. Yes. So he said he turned it into a doo-wop. And of course, Philly knows doo-wop. So he was like, Governor Wallace, oh yeah, you never can jail us all. Segregation's bound to fall. Shoo-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo. They started saying all them thousands of people. I said, he can't put us all in jail. This isn't about us being like we're gonna be defeated. We can't be defeated. Please understand. We should be celebrating beating our enemies.
Yeah.
because they're not enemies of black people. They are enemies of humanity. Please understand. Yes. We don't mind taking the lead in this fight. But these people, look, you think poor white people don't need health care? Isaiah Thomas not down there pushing legislation so that only black people get a better job. Come on now. Look. No. And this ain't about allies. You don't want your teeth fixed? No, that's a lie.
Well, we already know, Hollywood told the story of our brother Fred Hampton in the Rainbow Coalition, how it's beyond just us. All of us, poor people unite, disenfranchised, oppressed, marginalized groups. We all need to unite, against this structure that's holding this power. But something key while we're running out of time, I want to connect though. Talking about the songs of freedom, one of my favorite songs, of course, is "Sweet Honey and Rock," Ella's song. But what's really important for us to focus on, one line that I love in that song is, there's 2 lines. That which touches me most is that I had a chance to work with people, passing on to others that which was passed on to me. The other line in that song is, to me, young people come first. They have the courage where we failed. And I think that that is so important. So one of the questions before we leave that I would love for you and Councilman to answer is how do we inspire young people to become a part of this movement? We know that that's where the real work is done. When we study historic movements, even when we talk about Freedom School and Freedom Summer and SNCC, that was all the work of young people, college age people, high school people. But then they inspired even elementary school students to go out there and fight against dogs and hoses and be jailed. But all of that courage, right? Young people feel invincible. So once you inspire them to do something, then they're going to go out there and do it. So how do we work, especially in this age where we're young people are literally dying in the streets before they ever get to truly live life? How do we give them another alternative and inspire them to be a part of the Freedom Schools movement? I see you with your thinking cap on, Doc. Councilman, did you hear that question about inspiring young people?
Oh, yeah, he's good. I'll take because he's right quick before he jumps in. I know he's working. I'll say this very quickly and I'm gonna use Councilmember Isaiah Thomas as an example. It takes investment of resources. That's why we organize. You've got to give people resources. The first time we went to the farm in Tennessee for the Children's Defense Fund's headquarters at training grounds, we chartered a plane. That's because the School District of Philadelphia, in partnership with City Council and our partners, were able to pay for that plane. 140 high school students, Isaiah and them, all got on that plane. Many of them, the first flight they ever had. My man Cornelius was gripping the seats of the plane. So, he trying to be a hard rock. North Philly, Dobbs saying, I know, boy, you ain't never been on no plane. He was. That was my first flight. We got there. We had been there for several days, and we showed an episode of Eyes on the Prize.
Oh, you heard what Zeke said? Doc, he said that was his first flight. He said about 70-80% of them, he think that was their first flight too.
Oh, no question. And look, but Zeke, but you want to let Cornelius, you didn't let it show. Cornelius was hitting me. I thought he gonna tear the damn seat thing off. But this is the thing, and you'll remember this, man. We watched Eyes on the Prize, which means you got to have resources to pay for a plane, to pay for the hotels the young people were in. We were in Tennessee in the dark, in the middle of the night, watching a documentary under this tent on the farm, and I'll never forget this. We watched this thing about voting rights. We talking about Freedom Schools. We had a and then your man's Marvin gets up. He comes to the microphone. He says, I'm watching this and we seeing how far we've come. But if we've come so far, how come we still got to be scared to be down here in the middle of the night because of who's out here? That's how you change. Now, these are now men with families of their own, changing the world. But in that moment, that light went on in the mind of a 16, 17-year-old. And said, I just connected the 60s to now, and we got to do something about it. But it only happens when you put the resources in to take these young people out of a situation they're in just for a minute to be able to sit, think, talk to each other. And then now let's go back and do something about it. I'll never forget that moment, that power just in the comment of that teenager. That changed my life as a teacher. I'm like, damn, see, that's all you got to do. But somebody got to pay for it. That's why you got to do it.
Yes, somebody got to pay for it. I hear that.
Well, somebody got to get our money back because we already paid for it with our taxes. Somebody got to get our money back to pay for it. Yes.
Councilman, I know you got to hop off, so I'm going to let you speak. You can speak on that, or you can give the people some parting words. That's about, again, Freedom Summer, Freedom Schools, and that call to action. Because I know you got to hop off.
Yeah, I got to hop off in a minute. If you give me, can I get 2 seconds? I'm gonna take this vote and then I got final thoughts.
Oh yeah.
Do your thing. Me and Dr. Carr can keep moving on this. Yes.
Hey, did you hear that? Can I get 2 seconds? I gotta take this vote. Do y'all understand? Now, I ain't gonna vote. All parties are the same. Everybody who says that is what I want you to do right now. Your lips, take a little imaginary needle and sew them shut. Because you just heard why voting is important. Can I take 2 seconds? I gotta take this vote. Would you rather have him there or somebody who's going in to vote against what you need? It's just that simple. It's just that simple, friends.
It is.
And that mindset is why I do it, Dr. Carr, because it's not easy, especially during this time with the coronavirus and the pandemic and all that. But if you could see my background, that's my trainer gift from my 2007 class. So I take Freedom Schools with me everywhere. I got a couple other things in my office that you can see. Like that's my Ella Baker trainer plat. Like I really, Freedom Schools means the world to me. And I wish that council wasn't running late today because I could spend more time doing this. But I love my Freedom Schools family. I promise that we will put ourselves in a position where we will have more resources and we will be able to do this work on a larger scale, because it's imperative that we are the ones that put ourselves in a position to be the change that we want to see. And that's exactly how I decided to run for office. We recognized we had problems, and similar to what Dr. Carr said, this is not easy. It ain't always the funnest thing to do, but it's important that I'm at the table, because I know that based on my lived experiences, I know that based on the work that I've done, I know that based on my teaching, I think I'll quote Dr. Carr, and it's not like, anybody who knows Dr. Carr knows he's the most humble person ever. He probably could be, super famous and have millions of followers, but he chooses to do this work. And this work isn't always glorifying, but in the midst of the work that I do, I always catch myself quoting Dr. Carr and referencing things that was taught to me when I was in high school and when I was in college, and my perspective as it relates to advocacy for African-centered pedagogy, the historical context as it relates to the things that I've been taught. I thought it was just the norm, but in the space that I'm in, it's actually very unique. So I'm happy that I'm at the table, and folks can know that I'm going to continue to advocate and fight for us. And in the dream world, Shayna, I would love to have a group of young people who we could mentor to be the next generation of elected officials, campaign managers, chiefs of staff, and things like that. Because there's not a lot of appetite for it, but it's a whole lot of power and influence in this work, and we need to train our replacement.
That's right. Ooh.
Way to end on that, right?
We could just end on that a couple of minutes, but no, seriously, let that resonate. Oh, yes, sir.
Thank y'all. I appreciate it. I gotta jump off. I love y'all.
Love you, brother. Love you so much, man.
Thank you so much for joining us. So that was deep right there, right? And I think that, again, that's another thing. That's another mantra that he learned, that we learned right in the Freedom Schools movement. You are training your replacement. You are training your replacement, and it's so important to do that. Later on in the summer, we'll have some other past, present Freedom School folks on, but I always brag about my first Philadelphia Freedom School experience. I did some Freedom School stuff back when I was in New York. But coming to Philadelphia was my very first experience as a college student, working with 15 and 14-year-olds, training me on the Freedom Schools movement, where those young people are now principals of schools, working in government. We have some doing some work. Anshere, shout out right here with us at the center. Aaron, shout out to Aaron as well. But these people went on to do phenomenal things. Again, when they're coming up and they're doing this work, they aren't threats to me. I need to retire one day, right? I need to sit on down.
It's the whole job. That's what we want.
I need to be in the struggle in a different way.
That's what we want. Shannon, it's interesting you say, because one of the reasons why we parted with Children's Defense Fund, and we're all family. This is all love.
Yes.
Because we understood in Philadelphia that this is really a cultural grounded thing. For all you people who use the word hotel without knowing what it means, when you say train your replacement, the word in Egyptian is medu yawu. That's an ancient African concept. And at one time, Philadelphia had over half the Ella Baker trainers at the Children's Defense Fund in the country. And this was after Philadelphia Freedom Schools had left the Children's Defense Fund.
They were still training.
Like, our intellectual work is at the heart of what we do. That's what separates this program from every other program in the country. And we're heir to that long tradition. So Shane, I just want to thank you, because Freedom Summer in Philadelphia is something very special. And we see what it can do. We have to seize power. This ain't no game. Even though we play it as a game because we can master it, it ain't no game. Thank you, sis. You know how much we love you for doing this space every Thursday. If y'all don't watch this, you better watch every Thursday.
Doc, I thank you. And as always, I thank you. And just connected with the people, Dr. Carr is our resident Baba, and Isaiah made a good point, and he don't like to get, these accolades and lifted up, but you got to give people their flowers while they're here. Dr. Carr can be doing a million things, but we can always call on him to be in our space, to be down with Freedom Schools, and to preach to young people, and continue to be a mentor, a trainer, a father, a friend, a brother, and an uncle to all of us. So shout out to you, Dr. Carr. We appreciate you.
I love you. It's the only place to be.
Yes.
Thank you, dear. It's the only place to be.
To always follow Dr. Carr.
Love you, sis.
We are coming on time. So I want to shout everybody out for watching today. Please like, please share, please comment. But remember this call to action. What are you doing this Freedom Summer 2021 to elevate these people? You heard the things that Councilman said. You heard the things that Dr. Carr said. So take a look at yourself. What are you doing this Freedom Summer to make an impact? Thank you. We love you guys. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you next Thursday. Same place, same time, 12. Peace.